"Who are you?" she whispered, her gaze drifting around the sterile room before snapping back to him. "The lobby. I remember the lobby. My brother, he was right behind me. Where is he?" The words were a ghost in the sterile, antiseptic air of the ICU, spoken in Dutch, a language no one else in the room could understand. They were faint, ragged, but they sliced through the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Caleb Shepard stood frozen at the foot of the hospital bed, his janitor's uniform wrinkled and smelling faintly of bleach and fear. He stared at Evelyn Vinter, the woman who had been clinically dead less than an hour ago, a woman whose life he had dragged back from the brink against all odds. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were locked on his, and in them he saw not gratitude, but a deep, hazy confusion and a flicker of frightened recognition. He had risked everything, his quiet life, his anonymity, the safety of his daughter, for a stranger. And now, that stranger's innocent question told him everything he needed to know. She had no idea. He hadn't just fought against a medical anomaly. He had stepped into the middle of an execution. And the chilling realization settled in. He was the only person in the room who knew the truth. It had all started less than 24 hours ago, with the familiar squeak of his mop against the black and white marble floor of the Ethelgard Hotel lobby. The sound was the steady rhythm of a life he had chosen for its silence, its invisibility. Each stroke was a deliberate push against the memories of a different life, a life filled with the screams of sirens and the frantic pulse of a world he'd left behind. Here, there was only the scent of polish, the soft glow of chandeliers, and the quiet dignity of being unseen. It was all for Nora, his 7-year-old daughter, a safe, predictable world where fathers came home smelling of nothing more dangerous than cleaning supplies. The revolving doors hissed, slicing through the lobby's hushed atmosphere. A blast of cool night air swept in, carrying with it a new energy, sharp, commanding, and cold. Caleb didn't look up. His job was to focus on the floor, to remain a part of the hotel's seamless, silent machinery. A woman strode in, flanked by 2 men in severe dark suits. She was tall, with hair the color of spun gold, pulled into a tight, merciless chignon. She was speaking, her voice low and melodic, but the words were foreign, crisp, Dutch. Caleb's hand tightened on the mop handle. He understood every word. "The penthouse must be cleared. My security team will sweep it first," she said. Her assistant, a flustered young man, began stammering in English to the hotel manager, but the woman, Evelyn Vinter, cut him off with a sharp gesture. Her gaze swept the lobby with an air of profound boredom. It was then that her eyes landed on Caleb, and a flicker of annoyance crossed her features before she dismissed him as part of the furniture. The look was one he was used to. It was the armor of his new life. He was finishing the far corner near the grand fireplace when it happened. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Caleb turned. Evelyn Vinter was stumbling. Her hand, previously gesturing with sharp authority, was now pressed against her chest. Her face, moments ago a mask of cold control, was contorted in pain and confusion. She swayed, her perfect posture collapsing, and crumpled to the floor. Panic erupted. The manager shouted for someone to call 911. Her security team formed a useless, panicked circle around her. She was on her back now, her breath coming in ragged, shallow spurts. She was still speaking, her voice a desperate whisper in Dutch. "Het is mijn hart. Zeg het ze. It's my heart. Tell them." No one understood. Caleb dropped his mop. It clattered against the floor. He was moving before he made a conscious decision, the years of training he'd tried to bury surging to the surface. He pushed past a stunned bellhop. "Sir, you can't," one of the bodyguards said, putting an arm out to block him. Caleb ignored him. He spoke directly to Evelyn, his Dutch as crisp and clear as hers had been. "Mevrouw Vinter, can you hear me? My name is Caleb. I can help you." Her eyes, glazed with pain, focused on him in disbelief. "The janitor?" "Tell me what you feel," he commanded. his voice calm, authoritative. His fingers went to the pulse point on her neck. It was thready, dangerously erratic. A sharp pain radiates my arm, she gasped. Tingling, my jaw. Classic signs, but something was wrong. Her lips were turning blue, a sign of cyanosis that was happening far too quickly. Sir, get back, the bodyguard insisted. Her airway is constricting, Caleb shouted in English, his voice echoing with a command that made people jump. Someone get the emergency kit. But her breathing was stopping. Her eyes rolled back, and then he saw it. The detail that changed everything. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her left hand just before she went limp. It wasn't a standard heart attack. He knew with a sickening certainty. He was looking at something else. No time, he muttered, tilting her head back. He put his ear to her chest. Nothing, no heartbeat, cardiac arrest. He placed the heel of his hand on her sternum and began compressions. Hard, fast. The rhythm was seared into his muscle memory. The revolving doors hissed again. A man, impeccably dressed, with the same sharp features and cold eyes as Evelyn, strode in. What in God's name is going on here? He roared. Mr. Vinter, the assistant sobbed. It's your sister. The man, Lachlan Vinter, took in the scene, his face contorted in a mask of fury. Get your filthy hands off her, he lunged, grabbing Caleb's shoulder and hauling him back. Stop, you'll kill her, Caleb yelled, trying to shake him off. She's in cardiac arrest. Security, get this lunatic away from her, Lachlan screamed. 2 hotel guards grabbed Caleb's arms, dragging him away from Evelyn's still body. You don't understand, he yelled, fighting against them. She needs a defibrillator. Every second you wait, her brain is dying. Lachlan knelt beside his sister, his expression a strange, unreadable mix of panic and something colder. Just then, the wail of sirens grew louder. Paramedics burst through the doors, their gear rattling. They took over, pushing everyone back as they got the paddles on her chest. Charging to 200, clear. Her body arched. Nothing. Charging to 300, clear. She jumped again. A faint, erratic rhythm appeared on the monitor. They had a pulse. As they loaded her onto a gurney and rushed her out, the lobby was left in a state of shocked silence. Caleb stood between the 2 guards, his chest heaving, his adrenaline starting to crash. He had saved her. But as he looked at Lachlan Vinter, who was staring at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred, he knew this was far from over. I want him arrested, Lachlan said, his voice dangerously low, pointing a finger at Caleb. Now, arrest him for what? A steady voice cut through the tension. Grant Maddox, the hotel's head of security, stepped forward, his solid frame subtly positioning itself between Lachlan and Caleb. His demeanor was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Assaulting a guest or saving her life, because I've got 5 camera angles that will show Mr. Shepard here acting only to provide medical aid. Lachlan Vinter's head snapped toward him. And who are you? The man who reviews the security footage, Maddox said, his tone even. I assure you, Mr. Vinter, the only thing those cameras will show is your sister collapsing and my employee preventing a tragedy. 2 police officers had arrived, their expressions weary. What's the situation here? The older one asked, his gaze moving from Lachlan's $1,000 suit to Caleb's simple janitor uniform. Lachlan immediately took control. That man, he said, his voice dripping with authority, put his hands on my sister. He was behaving erratically. That's a lie, Caleb said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline crash that was starting to hit him. I was responding to her. She was speaking Dutch. I was the only one who understood what she was saying. The officer looked at Caleb, a skeptical frown on his face. You speak Dutch? Yes, and I recognize the signs of an atypical cardiac event. The paramedics will confirm her heart had stopped. The officer was clearly out of his depth, caught between a billionaire's accusation and a janitor speaking with the vocabulary of a doctor. Grant Maddox stepped in again. With all due respect, Mr. Vinter, he said, his voice dropping to a low, firm rumble. "Your identity doesn't change what happened. I'm sure the last thing your sister's company needs right now is a media storm about how her family tried to have the man who saved her life arrested." The word media was the magic bullet. Lachlan's jaw tightened. He shot Caleb a look of pure venom, a look that promised this wasn't over. "Fine," he spat. "But if it turns out he harmed her in any way, I will hold this entire hotel responsible, and I will find him." He turned and stormed out of the lobby, following the path the gurney had taken. The police, seeing the conflict fizzle, took a few witness statements and left, but not before the older officer gave Caleb a hard look. "Stay away from them," he warned. "You got lucky tonight. Don't push it." Caleb just nodded, his body trembling. Mr. Davies, the manager, rushed over, his face pale. "Shepard, my office, now." In the manager's office, Davies paced back and forth. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The Vinters could ruin us." "I saved a woman's life," Caleb said, his voice flat. "You're a janitor," Davies snapped, his fear making him cruel. "You're not supposed to do whatever that was. You're paid to be invisible." Caleb looked at the man's panicked face and felt a profound weariness settle into his bones. This was why he'd chosen this life. It was simple. Complications got people hurt. He'd had enough of that to last a lifetime. "I'm suspended, aren't I?" Caleb asked. "Indefinitely. With pay," Davies said quickly, a pathetic attempt to soften the blow. "Just go home, Shepard. Lie low. Don't talk to anyone. We'll handle this." Caleb didn't argue. He turned and walked out, grabbing his worn jacket from a locker in the staff room. As he left through the service exit, Grant Maddox was there, leaning against the brick wall, the ember of a cigarette glowing in the dark. "You did the right thing, you know," Maddox said, taking a drag. "Doesn't feel like it," Caleb replied, shoving his hands in his pockets. "That brother of hers, something's not right there," Maddox said, his voice quiet. "The way he looked at you, it wasn't just anger, it was fear, like you'd ruined a plan." Caleb froze, the words hanging in the cool night air. Maddox had seen it too. It was the same cold dread he had felt when Lachlan had first laid eyes on him. "Take a piece of advice," Maddox said, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under his heel. "Guys like that don't forget. Be careful." The bus ride home was a blur. The city lights smeared across the rain-streaked windows, but Caleb saw none of it. He saw Lachlan's face, a mask of fury and fear, like you'd ruined a plan. The words echoed in his mind. What plan could a janitor possibly ruin? He shook his head, trying to force the thoughts away. It wasn't his problem anymore. He had to think about Nora. He got off at his stop and walked the 2 blocks to his small apartment building. The light was on in their window, a warm, yellow square in the darkness. That was his world. That small, safe square. Everything he did was to protect it. He let himself in, the familiar scent of home a welcome comfort. He was just a janitor, a single father. He would take the suspension, cash the paychecks, and find another job mopping floors somewhere else if he had to. He would disappear again. He had to. He walked toward the living room, a practiced, quiet apology for being late already on his lips, his mind desperately trying to shove the events of the last hour into a locked box. But he knew, with a chilling certainty, that Lachlan Vinter had the key, and he would not stop until he'd used it. Caleb walked into his small, tidy living room. His neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind retiree with a halo of white hair, looked up from the kitchen table where she and Nora were coloring. Nora, her face a mask of intense concentration, was meticulously shading in the wings of a dragon. "Daddy!" she squealed, jumping up from her chair and running to him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "We're making a purple dragon, for you." Caleb knelt and hugged her, burying his face in her hair, the scent of crayons and shampoo a welcome anchor in the storm that was raging inside him. "It's the best dragon I've ever seen, sweetie," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Caleb, you're home early," Mrs. Gable said, her kind eyes crinkling with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Maria," he lied, forcing a smile. "They, had a plumbing issue in the main hall. Sent some of us home until it's fixed." The lie felt clumsy on his tongue. He spent the next hour trying to be normal. He sat at the table and colored. He helped Nora with the tricky parts of the dragon's tail. He listened as she chattered on about her day at school, but his mind was miles away, in a sterile hospital room. He kept seeing Evelyn Vinter's face, the tremor in her hand, the blue tinge of her lips. It was a clinical puzzle his brain refused to let go of. Brugada syndrome, an atypical variant. It was the only thing that fit the rapid desaturation. A standard EKG might even miss it. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Across town, Lachlan Vinter sat in a private waiting room at St. Michael's Hospital, a cup of untouched coffee on the table beside him. The head of cardiology, a respected doctor named Kenji Tanaka, entered the room, his face etched with professional concern. "Mr. Vinter," Dr. Tanaka began, "your sister is stable for now. The event in the lobby was a severe case of stress-induced cardiomyopathy, likely brought on by extreme exhaustion. We've started her on a beta blocker to regulate her heart rhythm, and we should see steady improvement." Lachlan nodded, his expression a perfect performance of a grateful, worried brother. "Thank you, doctor. That diagnosis aligns with what her specialist in Amsterdam has been treating her for. She has a history of these stress-induced episodes." He slid a business card across the table. "This is Dr. Jansen. He has her complete file. He's expecting a call from your office. He can provide any historical data you might need." "Excellent," Dr. Tanaka said, taking the card. "This will be very helpful. It's always best to have a complete picture." "Just do whatever it takes to make her well, doctor," Lachlan said, his voice laced with false sincerity. He was handing the doctor a loaded gun and a signed permission slip to use it. The beta blockers, the standard treatment for a stress-induced event, would have a catastrophic effect on the delicate electrical channels of a heart with Brugada. Lachlan knew it was only a matter of time. He had set the stage for a quiet, tragic, and perfectly believable death. Later that evening, Caleb tucked Nora into bed. She held up her purple dragon drawing for him to see one last time. "He'll keep the bad dreams away," she said seriously, her eyes drooping with sleep. "Yeah, he will," Caleb whispered, kissing her forehead. He smoothed her comforter and watched her for a long moment, her small chest rising and falling in the soft glow of her nightlight. This was his peace. This was his sanctuary. Intervening in Evelyn Vinter's fate would put all of this at risk. Lachlan Vinter was not a man who would tolerate interference. He would dig, and if he found out who Caleb really was, the quiet life he had built for his daughter would be annihilated. He walked back into the silent living room, the drawing of the purple dragon in his hand. He pinned it to the cork board on the wall where they kept her artwork. He looked at the creature's fierce, protective eyes. He'll keep the bad dreams away. But some bad dreams you couldn't run from. Some you had to turn and fight. He was a doctor. He had taken an oath. He could not stand by and let a man murder his sister through medical malpractice, no matter the cost. His quiet life was a lie if he had to sacrifice his soul to keep it. His decision made, a grim resolve settled over him. He walked to the back of his hall closet, behind a stack of old blankets, and pulled out a dusty shoebox. Inside, beneath faded photos of a woman with a kind smile, Nora's mother, was a cheap, disposable burner phone and a prepaid SIM card still in its plastic casing. He hadn't touched it in 3 years. It was a relic from a past he had sworn was dead and buried. He sat at the kitchen table in the dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside his window. He inserted the SIM card and powered the phone on. The small screen lit up his face, a face that was now tight with a long-forgotten tension. His hands were steady as he dialed a number from memory, a number that connected to a man known only as Echo. a ghost in the machine who specialized in information. Echo owed him a life. Caleb was about to call in the dead. The phone rang once, twice. A voice, electronically distorted and devoid of warmth, answered. "It's been a long time, Doctor." "I need to know what they're giving her," Caleb said, his voice low and urgent. "A woman named Evelyn Vinter, St. Michael's Hospital. I need her chart. I need to know now." The electronically distorted voice on the other end of the line was flat, devoid of emotion. "Vinter, as in Vinter Global Shipping. You're aiming high for a ghost, Doctor." "Just get it for me, Echo," Caleb said, his knuckles white where he gripped the cheap plastic of the phone. "You know what you owe me." There was a sound like digital static. A sigh filtered through a dozen servers. "The debt is why I answered the phone. But this is a big ask. People like the Vinters don't have files. They have fortresses. Poking a fortress gets people like me noticed, and I don't like being noticed." "It's life or death," Caleb said, his voice raw. "It always is with you," the voice crackled back. "Fine, but this clears the slate, all of it. After I send you what you need, this number is dead. We are even. You are on your own. Understood?" "Understood," Caleb said. "You'll have it within the hour," Echo said, and the line went dead. Caleb stared at the phone, his heart pounding. He had just burned his only lifeline to the shadow world he had once inhabited. From now on, there was no safety net. He waited, the minutes stretching into an eternity. He paced the small apartment, the silence amplifying the frantic thoughts in his head. He was a fool. He was risking his daughter's safety, her entire future, on a diagnostic hunch and a memory from a war zone. He was about to lose his nerve when the burner phone vibrated, a low buzz against the wooden table, a single text message. He opened it. It was a grainy, poorly lit photo of a computer screen, a patient's digital chart. But the words were clear enough. Patient. Vinter, Evelyn. Diagnosis. Acute stress-induced cardiomyopathy. Tachycardia. Treatment. Protocol. Initiate IV metoprolol drip, 5 milligrams per hour. Sedation is needed. Monitor vitals. Caleb's blood ran cold. Metoprolol, a beta blocker. It was a death sentence. For a normal stress-induced heart issue, it was standard practice. For Brugada, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. It would suppress the heart's normal electrical regulators, leaving it vulnerable to the storm of chaotic, fatal arrhythmias the genetic disorder caused. They weren't just failing to treat her. They were actively loading the gun and pointing it at her heart. Below the image, a short, typed note from Echo. Brother provided extensive cardiac history from an Amsterdam specialist. Looks legit. They think they have it under control. Prognosis listed as good. Prognosis good. Caleb felt a wave of nausea. Her prognosis was fatal. They were killing her with confidence. Lachlan had played them perfectly. He shoved the phone in his pocket, his mind racing. What now? He had the proof, but it was inadmissible. Obtained illegally. It was the word of a janitor against a renowned European specialist and a team of cardiologists at a top-tier hospital. He'd be laughed out of the room, then arrested for stalking or worse. Lachlan would make sure of it. He had to find a way in, a human angle. Someone on the inside who could be convinced. He thought back to the lobby. The bodyguards were loyal to the payroll. Davies, the manager, was a coward. Lachlan was the enemy. But the assistant, the young man had looked genuinely terrified for her, not just for his job. His panic had seemed personal. What was his name? He'd heard Davies say it. Peterson. But how to get to him? He couldn't go to the hospital. He couldn't go back to the hotel. Lachlan's people would be everywhere. Caleb closed his eyes, forcing himself to replay the chaos in the lobby, searching for a detail. The paramedics had arrived. There was shouting. The assistant, Peterson, had been on his phone, his voice frantic. What had he said? The memory surfaced, a single clear sentence in the noise. Cancel the morning briefing at the Regale Conference Center. All Vinter personnel are to await instructions. The Regale Conference Center. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only shot he had. Lachlan would be at the hospital, playing the part of the devoted brother. His staff would be in limbo, gathered at the conference center. Peterson would be there. Caleb walked to Nora's door and pushed it open a crack. She was fast asleep, the purple dragon drawing on the wall standing guard. He looked at her peaceful face, and the risk he was about to take felt like a physical weight in his chest. He was about to step out of the shadows, to make himself a target. But if he didn't, a woman would die. And the part of him that was once a doctor, the part of him that was still a good man, would die with her. He scribbled a quick note for Mrs. Gable for the morning. A simple lie about being called into work early. He grabbed his worn jacket, the one that let him blend into any city crowd, and slipped out of the apartment. The burner phone, a cold, hard rectangle in his pocket. The night was cool and damp. The city was asleep. But Caleb had never felt more awake. He walked the dozen blocks to the downtown business district, his mind a whirlwind of strategy and fear. He rounded a corner and saw it 2 blocks away, the gleaming glass facade of the Regale Conference Center. A few black cars were parked out front, a silent testament to the corporate power gathered inside. Caleb ducked into a darkened alleyway across the street, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had no plan, no weapon, just a terrifying piece of information on a cheap phone and the desperate hope that a stranger's conscience was stronger than his fear. He settled in to wait, a ghost watching a fortress, praying for a single crack in the wall. Caleb waited. The hours bled together, the darkness of the alley shifting from the deep black of night to the hazy gray of pre-dawn. The city began to stir. Street sweepers hissed past, followed by the rumble of the first delivery trucks. Caleb's legs ached, and a cold exhaustion had settled deep into his bones. But he didn't move. He was a statue carved from adrenaline and resolve. Finally, just as the sun began to cast long shadows down the street, he saw movement. The main doors of the conference center opened, and the assistant, Peterson, stepped out. He looked pale and sleep-deprived, his tie already loosened. He walked away from the main entrance, pacing on the sidewalk as he spoke into his phone, his voice a low, anxious murmur. He was separated from the security guards at the door. This was the chance. Caleb waited for a city bus to pull up to the stop just past the conference center, its brakes hissing loudly. As the doors opened and a small crowd of people spilled onto the sidewalk, creating a moving shield, Caleb made his move. He kept his head down, his gait unremarkable, just another person in a hurry. He crossed the street, merging with the bus passengers, and timed his approach perfectly. He fell into step just behind Peterson as the young assistant ended his call and turned to walk back toward the entrance. "Mr. Peterson," Caleb said, his voice low and even. Peterson jumped, spinning around. His eyes widened in recognition and fear. "You! What are you doing here? You need to leave. Security will—" "Walk with me," Caleb said, not as a request, but as a calm command. He gestured with his head toward a narrow side street that ran between the conference center and the next building. 5 minutes. Her life depends on it. I can't," Peterson stammered, glancing nervously at the guards by the door. "They're killing her at the hospital," Caleb said, his voice sharp with urgency. "And her brother is helping them." That hit the mark. Peterson's face went pale. The color drained from his lips. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting between Caleb and the safety of the main entrance. Then, with a jerky nod, he followed Caleb down the side street, away from the prying eyes of the security detail. Once they were out of sight, tucked behind a large recycling dumpster, Peterson turned on him, his voice a panicked whisper. "What is this? Are you trying to blackmail us? I have nothing to give you." "I don't want money," Caleb said, pulling out the burner phone and holding it up so Peterson could see the photo of the medical chart. "I want you to look at this. This is your boss's treatment plan. They're giving her metoprolol. Peterson squinted at the screen. Okay, that's a heart medication, right? They said they have it under control. Her brother flew in her records from Europe. Her brother lied, Caleb said flatly. That drug is going to kill her. It's poison for what she really has. I saw the tremor in her hand, the speed of the cyanosis. That's not a stress reaction. It's a genetic disorder, a rare one. That medication will stop her heart for good, and this time, there won't be anyone there to restart it. Peterson shook his head, overwhelmed. How do you know this? Who are you? The police said you're a janitor. I used to be a doctor, Caleb said, the words tasting like rust in his mouth. A combat surgeon. I've seen this before, only once, but you don't forget it. He leaned in closer, his eyes intense. Lachlan knows. He has to. He's the one who gave them the false history. He's counting on them to make a mistake. No, Peterson whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Lachlan, he's ambitious, but he couldn't. Wouldn't he? Caleb pressed. Who takes over Vinter Global if Evelyn dies? Who stands to gain everything? Peterson's face was a mask of horror as the pieces clicked into place. He thought of Lachlan's strange calmness after the initial panic, his immediate focus on controlling the narrative, on getting rid of Caleb. What do you want from me? Peterson asked, his voice trembling. I need you to call the hospital. Not the front desk. I need you to get Dr. Kenji Tanaka on the phone. He's the lead cardiologist. You're her executive assistant. They'll put you through. And say what? That a janitor told me they're all wrong? They'll think I'm crazy. Lachlan will fire me. Or worse. You don't have to mention me, Caleb said, thinking fast. You just have to plant a seed of doubt, a smart one. Tell him you were on the phone with her specialist in Amsterdam, Dr. Jansen, just checking in. Caleb's mind raced, pulling the technical language from the depths of his memory. Tell him the specialist mentioned that given her family history, you should ask them to run a procainamide challenge to definitively rule out a latent sodium channelopathy. Use those exact words. Sodium channelopathy. Peterson stared at him, his mouth agape. A what? It's the medical term for what I think she has. Caleb explained. It's a test. A doctor hearing that specific phrase will be forced to pause. It will be a huge red flag that their current diagnosis might be incomplete. It might be enough to make them stop the beta blockers before it's too late. From the end of the alley, a voice shouted, Peterson, are you back here? It was one of the security guards. They were looking for him. I have to go, Peterson said, his eyes wide with panic. Caleb grabbed his arm, his grip firm but not painful. Her life is in your hands now. You saw what happened. You know I'm not lying. You can walk away, and by tomorrow you'll probably be promoted. Or you can make a phone call and save the life of a woman who trusts you. He let go and slipped away, melting back into the urban landscape, leaving Peterson alone in the alley. He didn't look back. He walked fast, turning corner after corner, putting as much distance as he could between himself and that building. He had done all he could. The rest was up to a terrified assistant and a system designed to trust billionaires over janitors. Back in the alley, Peterson fumbled for his own phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He took a deep, shuddering breath and walked back toward the conference center, pasting a neutral expression on his face as the security guard approached. There you are, the guard said. Mr. Vinter is on his way. He wants a full briefing. Of course, Peterson said, his voice sounding thin to his own ears. I was just getting some air. He walked back into the lavish, air-conditioned lobby, the world suddenly feeling unreal. Lachlan would be there in minutes. He looked at his phone, at the sleek corporate logo of Vinter Global on the screensaver. He thought of Evelyn, how she'd once paid for his mother's expensive surgery out of her own pocket, telling him simply, loyalty is a two-way street. He ducked into an empty boardroom, his heart hammering against his ribs. He pulled up the hospital's number, his thumb hovering over the call button. This was career suicide, at best. At worst, Lachlan would find out and destroy him. But then he pictured Evelyn's face, her eyes wide with terror as she lay on that cold marble floor. He pressed the button. Dr. Kenji Tanaka prided himself on his diagnostic acumen. He was the head of cardiology at one of the best hospitals in the state, a man who saw complex patterns in the chaotic symphony of a failing heart. The Vinter case, while high profile, was professionally straightforward. He was reviewing her chart, noting the stabilizing effect of the metoprolol, when his desk phone buzzed. "Dr. Tanaka, I have a David Peterson on the line for you," his assistant said. "He's Evelyn Vinter's executive assistant. He says it's urgent." Dr. Tanaka sighed, annoyed at the interruption. The families of wealthy patients were always the most demanding. "Put him through," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Dr. Tanaka? Thank you for taking my call." Peterson's voice was tight, nervous. I was just on the phone with Miss Vinter's specialist in Amsterdam, Dr. Jansen. Just a routine check-in. "Everything is under control here, Mr. Peterson," Dr. Tanaka said, his tone dismissive. "Her vitals are stabilizing nicely. The medication is working as expected." "Yes, of course, doctor. It's just Dr. Jansen mentioned something, and he insisted I pass it along. He said that given her family history, you should run a procainamide challenge to definitively rule out a latent sodium channelopathy." Dr. Tanaka sat up straighter. The words were so jarringly out of place, so clinically specific, that it felt like a record scratch in his mind. A janitor might talk about a heart attack. An assistant might ask if she's doing okay. No layman ever used the term sodium channelopathy. "I'm sorry," Dr. Tanaka said, his professional curiosity now piqued. "Her brother provided us with her complete file. There's no mention of any genetic channelopathies. Her EKG, while abnormal, doesn't show the typical Brugada pattern." "Yes, doctor. Jansen mentioned that," Peterson said, his voice gaining a sliver of confidence as he stuck to the script. "He said her presentation can be atypical in her family line. He was very insistent on the procainamide challenge. He called it critically important." A long silence stretched over the line. Dr. Tanaka stared at the wall of his office, at the framed diplomas and awards. A procainamide challenge wasn't a casual test. It involved administering a drug that could, in a patient with Brugada, induce the very arrhythmia you were trying to prevent. It was a controlled risk, but a risk nonetheless, and it was completely unnecessary for stress-induced cardiomyopathy. "Thank you for the message, Mr. Peterson," Dr. Tanaka said finally, his voice a cool, unreadable mask. "I'll take it under advisement." He hung up the phone, but he didn't lean back in his chair. He was unsettled. It was too specific, too strange. It felt less like a suggestion and more like a warning. He was about to pull up Evelyn's file again when he heard a knock. Lachlan Vinter stood there, a vision of tailored concern, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Dr. Tanaka," Lachlan said with a charming smile, "I brought you a coffee. I figured you could use it. Any news on my sister?" "She's stable, Mr. Vinter," Dr. Tanaka said, accepting the cup. "As we discussed, the medication is helping." "Wonderful. You and your team are miracle workers." Lachlan settled into the chair opposite the desk. Dr. Tanaka decided to test the waters. "I just received a strange call from your sister's assistant." A Mr. Peterson Lachlan's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "David? Oh, Lord, what has he done now? His heart is in the right place, but the man's an absolute mother hen." "He said he was relaying a message from her specialist in Amsterdam. Something about a sodium channelopathy?" Lachlan let out a theatrical laugh. "Dr. Jansen. Of course. The man is a brilliant researcher, but he's notoriously academic. He sees zebras around every corner. For years he's been trying to convince my sister she's a walking genetic anomaly. My father thought he was a quack. Please, doctor." Lachlan leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "We have complete faith in your diagnosis. You're the one here on the ground, seeing the reality of her condition. Don't let my frantic staff and their alarmist consultants distract you from your work." It was a masterful performance. He was simultaneously dismissing the concern, flattering Dr. Tanaka, and subtly pressuring him to stay the course. 99 times out of 100, it would have worked. But the specificity of that phrase, procainamide challenge, was like a splinter in Dr. Tanaka's brain. After Lachlan left, the doctor sat in the silence of his office, the smooth reassurances warring with a strange, urgent warning. He pulled up Evelyn's admission EKG on his computer. He magnified the printout, his eyes tracing the jagged peaks and valleys. His own diagnosis had been sound, based on the evidence. But he wasn't looking for evidence now. He was looking for doubt. And then he saw it. In the V2 lead, a tiny, almost insignificant anomaly. It wasn't the classic COVID-type ST segment elevation of Brugada type 1. It was a more subtle, saddleback shape that could be easily dismissed as a benign variant. But combined with the phone call, with the story of a specialist obsessed with rare genetics, it was just enough. It was a whisper of a zebra on the edge of a field full of horses. He stood there for a long moment, the weight of two futures in his hands. He could follow the safe path, the one endorsed and paid for by the powerful Vinter family. Or he could listen to the splinter in his brain, the nagging, unprofessional doubt. He walked briskly to the ICU nurse's station. A junior nurse looked up at him. "Doctor? Tanaka?" He looked her straight in the eye, his voice quiet but absolute, leaving no room for argument. "Stop the metoprolol drip on Miss Vinter, immediately." The nurse blinked, confused. "But sir, her brother was just here. He said he was pleased with her progress." Dr. Tanaka cut her off, his voice like ice. "I am the physician of record. Lachlan Vinter is not. Stop the drip, draw a full metabolic panel, and prep her for a procainamide challenge. Page me the second the kit is ready." Lachlan Vinter did not get to be second in command of a global empire by leaving things to chance. He had a source on every floor of the hospital, a network of whispers bought with cash and promises. Less than an hour after Dr. Tanaka gave his order, Lachlan's phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was a nervous nurse from the ICU. "Mr. Vinter, sir. Doctor. Tanaka canceled the beta blocker. He's taking her for a procainamide test right now." The silence in the black sedan where Lachlan was taking the call was absolute. The city noise outside seemed to fade away. His charming facade cracked, revealing the cold, reptilian fury beneath. Tanaka had defied him, and there was only one way the doctor could have found the courage, the sheer audacity, to do that. It all came back to the janitor. The car screeched into a U-turn, speeding back toward the hospital. Lachlan stormed through the entrance, his expensive shoes eating up the polished linoleum as he made a direct line for the cardiology wing. He found Dr. Tanaka just outside the ICU, scrubbing in for the procedure. "Tanaka!" Lachlan's voice was a low growl that made a passing orderly flinch. "What is the meaning of this? My source tells me you've stopped my sister's treatment and are proceeding with this reckless experiment against my express wishes." Dr. Tanaka turned, his face calm but set like granite. He had crossed his Rubicon, and there was no going back. "I have not stopped her treatment, Mr. Vinter. I have corrected it. My medical judgment is not a negotiation. Now, if you'll excuse me, the test is beginning. You can watch from the observation window, but you will not interfere with my team." Tanaka turned and walked into the specialized procedure room, leaving Lachlan seething in the hallway. He would let the doctor play out his little fantasy, and when he was proven wrong, Lachlan would not just have his job, he would have his medical license. While this confrontation was unfolding, Caleb was on the move. He couldn't wait in the darkness of his apartment any longer, a passive player in a game with his own life on the line. He needed to know. He found his way to the hospital, circling the massive building, his mind working, cataloging the service entrances, the delivery bays, the laundry chutes. He found what he was looking for. A laundry service entrance in the sub-basement. An old ID from a different cleaning company and a confident walk got him past the first checkpoint. From there, he knew the labyrinth. Inside the procedure room, the tension was thick. Evelyn lay on the bed, wires connecting her to a bank of monitors. Dr. Tanaka stood at the foot of the bed, watching the main screen which displayed her EKG in a steady green line. "Begin the infusion," Tanaka ordered. "Slowly." A nurse adjusted the IV drip. Lachlan watched from the observation window, his arms crossed, a cruel smirk touching his lips. The doctor was a fool. For a long minute, nothing happened. The green line continued its steady, rhythmic peak and fall. From the observation window, Lachlan couldn't see the shadowy figure who had just slipped into the far end of the hallway. Caleb had emerged from a service stairwell, his heart pounding. He saw Lachlan at the window, and his stomach clenched. Inside the room, Dr. Tanaka's brow was furrowed. The EKG was unchanged. Had he made a terrible mistake? "Increase the rate," he said, his voice tight. Another 30 seconds passed, still nothing. Lachlan's smirk widened. He was already composing the lawsuit in his head. Then, it happened. A flicker on the screen. A single, malformed wave. Then another. The steady, rhythmic peak of the ST segment began to curve upwards, transforming into the distinct, terrifying COVID shape that Tanaka had only ever seen in textbooks. The zebra was real. "There it is," Tanaka breathed, a mixture of horror and vindication in his voice. "Brugada pattern type 1. I need a photo of that screen now." Before the nurse could even move, the alarm on the monitor blared to life. The organized waves dissolved into a chaotic, useless, squiggling line. Ventricular fibrillation. Evelyn's heart was no longer beating. It was merely quivering. She was in cardiac arrest. "Code blue!" Tanaka yelled. "Get the crash cart! Charge to 200!" The room exploded into disciplined action. Nurses rushed in. One began compressions. Tanaka grabbed the defibrillator paddles. "Charging! Clear!" Evelyn's body convulsed on the bed. The chaotic line on the monitor remained. "No conversion! Charge again! 300 factorial clear!" Another violent jolt. In the hallway, Caleb watched the frantic scene through the glass, his own heart in his throat. He saw the grim determination on Tanaka's face. He also saw Lachlan. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of incandescent rage. His plan, years in the making, was crumbling into dust before his very eyes. The janitor, the doctor, they had ruined everything. "We have a rhythm," a nurse called out. A slow, steady beat returned to the screen. It was weak, but it was organized. They had brought her back. Dr. Tanaka leaned against the bed, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his forehead. He had the proof. He had saved her life by nearly ending it. As the controlled chaos in the room began to subside, Lachlan took a step back from the window, his mind racing, calculating his next move. His gaze swept the hallway, looking for a way to salvage the situation. And then he stopped. His eyes scanned past the nurse's station, past the waiting room, and into the shadows at the far end of the hall. He saw him. It was just for a second, a man in a hooded jacket, but he knew. It was the janitor. He was here. He had seen it all. Their eyes locked across the long, sterile corridor. In that moment, everything fell away. The doctors, the nurses, the hospital. There were only two people in the world who understood exactly what had just happened. Lachlan knew that Caleb knew. The game had changed. This was no longer a quiet, clinical execution. It was a hunt, and Lachlan Vinter was the predator. The moment their eyes locked, the world snapped into sharp, cold focus for Caleb. The clinical drama in the procedure room vanished, replaced by a single, primal instinct. Run. He didn't wait for Lachlan to raise a hand or shout an order. He saw the flicker of murderous recognition in the man's eyes, and that was enough. He turned and melted back into the shadows of the corridor, moving with a fluid silence that belied the frantic pounding of his heart. He heard a muffled command behind him, Lachlan's voice speaking into his phone. He's here. Find him. Black jacket, hood. He's in the West Wing. Do not let him leave this building." Caleb didn't risk the main elevators or stairwells. He darted through a set of double doors marked "Staff Only" and found himself in a brightly lit but deserted utility hallway. He could hear the heavy footsteps of security guards echoing from the main corridor, their pace quickening. He was being hunted. He ran, his soft-soled shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. He knew the layout of places like this. Every hospital, every hotel, every large building had the same hidden anatomy. A skeleton of service tunnels, storage closets, and forgotten stairways. It was the world he lived in now. He yanked open a door to a janitor's closet, slipped inside, and closed it just as two of Lachlan's men, broad-shouldered and grim-faced, rounded the far corner. He held his breath, the smell of ammonia and damp mops filling his lungs. He heard their footsteps pass, their voices low and urgent. He waited a beat, then slipped back out, heading in the opposite direction. He couldn't go up. He had to go down. To the basement, to the labyrinth. He found a service elevator, pried the doors open with his fingers just enough to slip through, and found the emergency ladder, climbing down through the darkness of the shaft. He landed in the sub-basement, a place of humming generators and giant, hissing pipes. He was back in his element. He moved through the darkness with a sureness that Lachlan's polished security team could never match. He found an emergency exit that led to a back alley, pushed the bar, and was blinded for a second by the late afternoon sun. He was out, but he wasn't safe. His first thought, a bolt of pure, unadulterated terror, was of Nora. His apartment was compromised. It would be the first place Lachlan would send his men. He couldn't go there. He couldn't call his own phone. Every second he wasted was a second they were getting closer to his daughter. He ran for 3 blocks, putting distance between himself and the hospital, before ducking into a noisy, crowded bus station. He pulled out the burner phone, his fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar buttons. He dialed the one number he knew he could trust. Grant Maddox picked up on the second ring. "Yeah? Grant, it's Caleb Shepard." "Caleb, what's going on?" "I heard things got messy at the Athelgard." "It's worse now," Caleb said, his words coming in a rush. "My life is in danger. The man I warned you about, Lachlan Vinter, he tried to have his sister killed at the hospital. I stopped it, and he saw me. He's hunting me, Grant. But that's not the problem. He knows where I live. My daughter is there." The line was silent for a moment, but Caleb could hear the shift in Maddox's breathing. The security professional was processing the threat. "Nora," Maddox said, her name a statement of understanding. "She's with my neighbor, Maria Gable. Apartment 2B. You have to get them out of there. Now Lachlan's men are coming for me, and they will not be gentle." "Where do I take them?" Maddox's voice was all business now. "Anywhere. A hotel. Your place. Just get them away from there. Don't let them pack. Just go. And Grant, be careful. These guys are not hotel security." "I was a cop for 15 years before I took this job, kid," Maddox said, a grim reassurance in his tone. "I remember how to handle myself. Stay alive, Caleb. I'll keep your girl safe." Maddox hung up. Caleb stood in the chaotic terminal, a ghost in the crowd, feeling utterly helpless. He had just thrown his only friend into the line of fire. Back at the hospital, Lachlan stood in the hallway, his composure a thin sheet of ice over a volcano of rage. His head of security approached him. "The janitor got away," the man reported. "He slipped out the back. We're pulling camera footage now." "Forget the footage," Lachlan commanded, his voice deadly calm. "I have his employment file from the hotel. I have his address. Take a team. I don't want him brought in for a conversation. I want him gone, and I want whatever proof he thinks he has. Search his apartment. If his daughter is there, secure her. She'll make excellent leverage to draw him out." In a quiet suburb miles away, Grant Maddox slammed his old sedan into gear, tires squealing as he pulled out of the Ethelgard's parking garage. He was dialing with one hand and driving with the other, calling in a favor from an old contact at the police department. At the same time, a black, unmarked SUV with tinted windows pulled away from the hospital, accelerating into downtown traffic, its occupants checking their weapons. Caleb's apartment building sat on a quiet, tree-lined street. Nora and Mrs. Gable were in the living room, reading a book together, oblivious. They didn't see the black SUV as it turned onto the street, slowing as the driver looked for the address. They didn't see the gray sedan that screeched around the opposite corner a moment later, its driver's face a mask of grim determination. The two vehicles were now on a collision course, both heading for the same unsuspecting front door. The race to Nora had begun. Grant Maddox saw the black SUV a block away. It was moving with a slow, predatory confidence, the kind that meant the occupants weren't worried about being seen. He saw the glint of tinted windows and the cold, professional stillness of the men inside. He'd seen cars like that 100 times before, usually parked outside the homes of witnesses who were about to change their testimony. He didn't hesitate. He floored it. His old sedan roared to life, tires squealing as he swerved, not toward the curb, but directly into the path of the SUV, blocking the narrow residential street. The SUV's driver slammed on the brakes, stopping inches from Maddox's driver's side door with a screech of tortured metal. It was a bluff, a roadblock, a moment of chaos. It wouldn't last long, but it was all he needed. He was out of the car before the engine settled, sprinting toward the apartment building's entrance. Behind him, he heard the heavy thud of car doors opening. He didn't look back. As he yanked open the main door, he reached inside and pulled the building's fire alarm. A deafening klaxon began to shriek, echoing through the halls. Doors opened, residents poking their heads out in confusion. The chaos was his cover. He took the stairs 2 at a time and pounded on the door of apartment 2B. Mrs. Gable opened it, a look of bewilderment on her face. "Good heavens, what is all that racket?" "Maria, my name is Grant Maddox. I'm a friend of Caleb's," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. "He sent me. There's an emergency. You and Nora need to come with me, right now." "An emergency?" "What's happened to Caleb?" "He's fine, but we have to go." "Leave everything," Maddox insisted, his eyes darting down the hallway. He could hear the heavy, determined footsteps of Lachlan's men on the stairs. He scooped up a terrified Nora into one arm and grabbed Mrs. Gable's elbow with his free hand. "Back door, now." He hustled them through the small apartment, out the kitchen door, and onto a rickety fire escape. A tense chase down the alley, a brief, brutal confrontation with a third man trying to cut them off, and Maddox threw himself and Nora into the driver's seat of his car. He slammed the door, hit the lock, and stomped on the gas. The car shot forward as the back window shattered, careening out of the alley and onto a main thoroughfare. The black SUV was right behind him, gaining fast. In the pristine, quiet comfort of her private hospital room, Evelyn Vinter's eyes fluttered open. The first thing she saw was the anxious, relieved face of her brother, Lachlan. "Evelyn," he breathed, rushing to her side and taking her hand. "Thank God, you're awake." Her throat was raw. Her mind was a fog of pain and confusion. What happened?" she rasped. "There was a complication," Lachlan said, his voice a perfect blend of sorrow and strength. "That specialist in Amsterdam, Jansen, the one we all thought was an alarmist, he was right. You have this rare genetic condition. The doctors here, they almost made a mistake, Evelyn, a terrible one, but I wouldn't let them. I kept pushing. I insisted they run more tests. I saved you." He squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with manufactured sincerity. Evelyn listened, her head throbbing. It sounded right. It sounded plausible. Lachlan had always been ambitious, but he was her brother. He loved her, didn't he? But something was wrong. Through the fog, a memory nagged at her. A moment of absolute terror on a cold marble floor. And a voice. A calm, steady voice, speaking her mother's language. A voice that was not Lachlan's. Later that day, Dr. Tanaka came to see her. He was professional, clinical, and chose his words with the care of a man walking through a minefield. He explained the diagnosis of Brugada syndrome and the defibrillator they would implant. "My brother said you almost misdiagnosed me," Evelyn stated, her eyes searching his for a reaction. Dr. Tanaka's expression didn't change, but he hesitated for a fraction of a second. The initial presentation was atypical. It mimicked a more common condition. Fortunately, we received some timely external consultation that prompted us to reconsider the initial findings. External consultation. The phrase snagged in Evelyn's mind. It wasn't what Lachlan had said. Lachlan had taken all the credit. After the doctor left, Evelyn lay in the silence, the two stories echoing in her head. She closed her eyes, pushing past the pain, trying to rebuild the memory of the lobby. The fall, the panic, the faces looming over her. And then, a face she didn't recognize. A man in a simple uniform. His eyes weren't panicked. They were focused. His hands were steady. He had spoken Dutch to her. He had understood. He was the key. With a surge of effort, she reached for the call button. A nurse entered. "I need my personal phone," Evelyn said, her voice weak but regaining its familiar steel. "And I need you to get a message to my head of security in Amsterdam. Tell him to get on the next flight. Tell no one else, especially not my brother." Grant Maddox lost the SUV after 10 minutes of harrowing, high-speed driving that broke every traffic law in the state. He pulled into the underground parking garage of a 24-hour supermarket, killed the engine, and let his head fall against the steering wheel, his breath coming in ragged gasps. In the passenger seat, Mrs. Gable was crying silently. In the back, Nora was finally starting to sob. "I want my daddy," she whispered, her small voice breaking his heart. Maddox took a deep, shuddering breath. He was in this, all the way. He pulled out his phone to call Caleb and tell him they were safe, for now. But before he could dial, a text message lit up the screen. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "They have your plate. They'll have your name in an hour. Your life is in danger now. I'm so sorry. Destroy this phone. Get somewhere safe they can't track." It was from Caleb. He had anticipated this. Grant Maddox was no longer a helpful friend. He was a target. He looked in the rearview mirror at the terrified, tear-streaked face of the little girl in the back seat. The weight of his promise to Caleb settled on him. He wasn't just a helper anymore. He was her protector, and they were officially on the run. Grant Maddox looked at the burner phone in his hand, Caleb's stark message burning on the screen. He crushed it under his heel on the grimy concrete of the parking garage. He pulled the SIM card from his own phone and snapped it in half, dropping the pieces down a storm drain. He was dark. For now. He knew a place, a ghost on the map from his early days on the force. A dilapidated fishing cabin 2 hours north, with no address a GPS could find. After abandoning his car and renting a truck under a fake name, he drove through the night. A sleeping child in the back, the city lights shrinking in his rearview mirror. In a grimy bus terminal miles away, Caleb made a final, desperate call. "Echo, I need more than information. I need to disappear, and I need to be able to fight back." The distorted voice was cold. "That's not a favor, Doctor. That's a new life. It comes with a price. You'll owe me. When I call, you answer. You become my asset. No questions." "Done," Caleb whispered. The instructions were simple. A key taped under a bench. A locker. Inside was a duffel bag, containing a new identity, a stack of cash, and a cold, heavy handgun. Caleb Shepard, the janitor, was gone. A man named Michael Hayes, a ghost with a mission, took his place. 2 days later, a man named Soren was stepping off a private jet. He was tall, with the watchful stillness of a wolf, and his loyalty to Evelyn Vinter was absolute. In her hospital room, she gave him her orders in Dutch. "Find the janitor. His name is Caleb Shepard. Find him before my brother does." Soren was efficient. Within hours, he knew about Caleb, his daughter Nora, and the disappearance of the ex-cop, Grant Maddox. He found Maddox's abandoned car and discovered a single, crushed pink bead near Caleb's empty apartment. A child was involved. The stakes were no longer just corporate. They were primal. Caleb, now operating from a nondescript motel room, began his own hunt. Using his new resources, he dug into the Amsterdam specialist, Dr. Jansen. It didn't take long to find the truth. A Vinter-owned shell corporation had bailed out Jansen's failing medical supply company 3 years prior. Lachlan didn't have a contact, he had an asset. Caleb now had proof of the conspiracy, but he had no way to deliver it. He knew he couldn't storm the hospital, a fortress guarded by Lachlan's men. So he would use Lachlan's own world against him. He sent an anonymous encrypted email to a notoriously cantankerous Vinter board member, leaking a plausible, fabricated, and explosive lie about Lachlan's mismanagement of a hostile takeover. The effect was instantaneous. Vinter Global's stock wavered. The board was in a panic. Lachlan, trapped and furious, was forced to leave the hospital to put out the fire. From a parking garage roof, Caleb watched Lachlan's SUV speed away. The king had left the castle. He put on a stolen orderly's uniform, the gun a cold weight against his back. He created a minor chemical scare in the basement labs, a code red that drew one of the 2 guards from Evelyn's door. At the same moment, Soren arrived to confront the other. While the remaining guard was distracted, Caleb slipped in through a ceiling vent. He dropped silently into Evelyn's bathroom, then stepped into the main room. She was awake. Her eyes widened. Before she could scream, he raised a finger to his lips. "Miss Vinter," he whispered in Dutch. "My name is Caleb Shepard. You're in terrible danger." He showed her the evidence on the burner phone. As the cold, corporate truth of her brother's betrayal settled over her, the door burst open. Soren stood there, weapon drawn. "Soren, no!" Evelyn commanded, her voice like steel. "Stand down. He's the one." An alliance was forged. They had to get her out. Just as they formulated a desperate plan, Evelyn's phone rang. It was Lachlan. He knew the board meeting was a ruse. He was coming back. Their escape was audacious. Evelyn in a wheelchair, pushed by Caleb in a guard's suit, with Soren in a doctor's coat. They walked out the front door in plain sight as Lachlan's SUVs screeched to a halt at the main entrance. They took a different car, one belonging to a hospital administrator, and disappeared into the city. From the moving vehicle, Evelyn made a call. "Marcus," she said to the board member, "my brother has been attempting to murder me. I have proof. Seize his assets. Lock him out of the system, immediately." Lachlan, charging into the empty hospital room, found his corporate world dismantled. But he still had his private security, and he knew where Caleb would go. He used his resources to find Maddox's old police records, to find the location of the forgotten cabin. Caleb arrived at the dark, silent cabin first, his heart pounding. Maddox was on the porch. "She's inside," he said. "She's safe." Caleb walked in. A fire was crackling. Nora was asleep on a cot. He knelt beside her, a wave of profound relief washing over him. It was a trap. The floorboards creaked. Lachlan stood there, a gun in his hand. "Did you really think I wouldn't find this place?" he sneered. 2 of his men held Maddox and Mrs. Gable in the corner. "It's over." Caleb slowly stood, placing himself between Lachlan and his sleeping daughter. In the flickering firelight, he saw Maddox tense. Caleb gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. As Lachlan smiled, Maddox roared and threw his weight backwards. Simultaneously, Caleb lunged, not at Lachlan, but at the heavy iron fireplace poker, swinging it and shattering the single oil lamp, plunging the room into darkness. A gunshot roared, deafeningly wide. Nora woke with a scream. Caleb moved, a shadow in the firelight. He wasn't a doctor or a janitor now. He was a soldier. He crashed into Lachlan, and the 2 of them went down. The fight was brutal, primal, and short. As they grappled on the floor, the cabin door burst open, and Soren's team flooded the room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They found Caleb with his hands around a defeated Lachlan's throat, his face a mask of cold fury. It was over. A few months later, the sun was setting over a small, newly opened community clinic. A sign above the door read, "The Shepherd Clinic for Veterans and Families." Caleb stood outside, watching Nora chase butterflies. She was laughing again. A car pulled up, and Evelyn got out. The ordeal had changed her, stripped away the cold armor, leaving a quiet strength. "The endowment is finalized," she said, coming to stand beside him. "The clinic is funded for the next 50 years. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said. "You gave me back my life." "No," she said, her eyes meeting his. "You gave me back mine." They stood in comfortable silence, watching his daughter. Lachlan was facing a lifetime in prison. Maddox was the new head of Vinter Global Security. The world had been righted. "Daddy, look!" Nora shouted, running up to them and holding out a dandelion. Caleb smiled, a real, easy smile. He looked from his daughter to Evelyn, from his past to his future. The janitor was gone. The soldier was gone. In their place was a man who had finally found his peace.